Hey everyone, welcome back. Ready for another deep dive? Today we're tackling something that's a real head scratcher, even for the professionals. Juvenile Idiopathic Arthritis, or JIA.
Yeah, it's definitely a tricky one.
We've got a fantastic review article from March 2024 all lined up for you, Advancements in Progress in Juvenile Idiopathic Arthritis. But before we get lost in the research jargon, I gotta ask, when they describe JIA as a chameleon in this paper, that really threw me for a loop. What's the deal with that analogy?
Well, it's actually pretty clever when you think about it. You see, JIA, it's not a one-size-fits-all kind of disease. It can manifest in so many different ways. Each case, each child, it's like they've got their own unique version of it, you know?
Okay, so like a chameleon changing its colors, JIA changes how it looks depending on the kid.
Exactly. And to make things even more interesting, there are all these different subtypes of JIA, each with its own quirks. That's where this system, the ILR classification, comes into play. It helps us make sense of all the variations.
Hold on, IOER. Sounds like something you'd order at a fancy coffee shop.
Haha. Yeah, I get that a lot. It stands for the International League of Associations for Rheumatology. Basically, they're the bigwigs who set the standards for diagnosing and managing all sorts of rheumatic diseases, including JIA.
So what are some of the ways this JIA chameleon, as we're calling it, actually shows up? Give us the lowdown on some of those subtypes.
All right, so one of the more common ones is called oligoarticular JIA. It typically affects a smaller number of joints, often the knees or ankles, sometimes elbows. But here's the kicker. Some kids with this type, they might also have eye inflammation, which is called uveitis. And that can get serious if it's not caught early.
Wow, see, that's what I mean about JIA being a real mystery. Joint pain? I get. But eye problems too. That's wild.
Right. It just goes to show how complex this disease can be. And then you've got polyarticular JIA, which, as the name suggests, involves multiple joints, usually 5 or more. This one can actually look quite similar to adult rheumatoid arthritis in some cases.
So two kids, both diagnosed with JIA, but completely different experiences. I imagine that makes getting a diagnosis a real pain, literally and figuratively.
You hit the nail on the head. Diagnosing JIA, it's not like there's this one magic test that gives you a definitive answer. There's no blood test, no single X-ray that screams JIA. It often involves a lot of piecing together the puzzle, looking at the child's symptoms, their medical history, ruling out other potential culprits.
That's got to be incredibly frustrating for families.
It absolutely can be, especially because we know that early diagnosis and treatment are crucial with JIA. The sooner you can intervene, the better the chances of preventing long-term. Well, for one thing, there's just more awareness now than there used to be. Pediatricians, they're more tuned in to the possibility of JIA, so they're more likely to think of it when a child comes in with those telltale signs, like joint pain. Plus, the criteria we use to actually diagnose JIA, those have gotten a lot more, I guess you could say, refined over time.
That makes a lot of sense. But even with the diagnosis, this research paper, it kind of makes it clear that we're still in the dark about what actually causes JIA. It's like, hey, here's this disease, figure it out.
You're not wrong there, and that's exactly why they call it idiopathic. It basically means, in the medical world, we have no clue what's causing this.
Mystery diagnosis. So what are the leading theories right now? The paper mentioned something about the immune system being a major player in all of this.
Right. The big idea, the one most researchers are leaning towards, is that JIA is an autoimmune disease. So picture this. Your immune system, it's like your body's own personal bodyguard, right? It's there to fight off infections, keep you healthy, all that good stuff.
Gotcha.
But with an autoimmune disease, well, that bodyguard, it's like it gets its wires crossed, starts mistaking your body's own cells for the enemy. And in the case of JIA, it's the joints that are getting attacked. That's where that pain, the stiffness, all those not so fun symptoms come from.
So basically the immune system is waging war on the joints.
That's a pretty good way to put it. But the million-dollar question, the one that still has researchers scratching their heads, is why? Why does the immune system go rogue like this, especially in kids? And that's where things get really complicated. The research points to a few different factors, but genetics and environment, those seem to be the biggies.
Okay, so let's break those down a bit. What about the genetics angle? What have scientists figured out about how genes might be linked to JIA?
Well, there's been some really cool progress on that front with these things can get ready for it, genome-wide association studies. It's a mouthful, I know.
Definitely not rolling off the tongue.
But basically what they do is look at a ton of genes all at once to see if any of them pop up more often in people, kids in this case with JIA, compared to those without it.
So like a massive genetic comparison.
You got it. And they've actually found a whole bunch of genes that seem to, they increase a child's risk of developing JIA. Now, it's important to remember this doesn't mean that having those genes is a guarantee you'll get JIA, just that it might make you more susceptible, more vulnerable.
Okay, so genes might set the stage, so to speak,
Hmm.
but then you need something in the environment to actually trigger JIA.
Exactly. It's like a 1-2 punch. And the research, it mentions things like infections, especially viral infections, as being potential triggers. There's also some thought that things like, stress, maybe even diet could play a role.
Wow, so not just one thing, but this whole recipe for JIA to develop.
Kind of like a perfect storm, yeah. And because it's so multifactorial, so complex, that just makes it that much harder to figure out how to prevent it, how to treat it effectively.
This is all fascinating stuff, but I gotta admit, the paper mentioning the use mice to study JIA, that caught my attention. How do you even give a mouse arthritis?
It does sound kind of strange when you say it out loud, but scientists, they're clever, right? They've figured out ways to essentially genetically engineer mice, so they develop a condition that's remarkably similar to human JIA.
Okay, I have to ask, what's the point of that?
Yeah.
Giving mice arthritis, how does that help us understand what's going on in kids with JIA?
Well, think about it. By studying these mice, scientists can do things that would be, impossible to do in humans, ethically speaking. You can track the progression of the disease over time in a really controlled way. You can test out new drugs and treatments without putting human subjects at risk. You can even zoom in at a molecular level and see how different cells are interacting within the joints.
So it's like having this, I don't know, living, breathing model of JIA that researchers can poke and prod to their heart's content.
Exactly. And it's led to some major breakthroughs in our understanding of JIA. For example, we now know that certain types of immune cells are way more active in the joints of mice with JIA compared to healthy mice.
So it's not just the immune system as a whole, but these specific troublemakers that are causing all the havoc.
Bingo! And once you know who the bad guys are, well, that gives you a target for developing new treatments, therapies that are more precise, more effective, and hopefully with fewer side effects.
So we've covered a lot of ground here, talking about how hard it can be to even diagnose JIA, let alone figure out what causes it. But what about the kids who are living with it every day? What's the latest on treatments and what's on the horizon?
That's the good news here, honestly. The advancements in JIA treatments, even in the last few years, it's kind of amazing. And this research paper, it dives into some seriously cool stuff that's going on right now. It's not just about managing symptoms anymore, it's about actually getting ahead of this thing.
Okay, color me intrigued. So what are we talking about here? What's in the toolkit for fighting JIA these days?
Well, for starters, medication is still a cornerstone. We're talking everything from your basic over-the-counter pain relievers, your ibuprofens of the world for when things are flaring up, all the way to these really powerful drugs called biologic.
Oh yeah, the biologics, those were mentioned in the paper, right? Like
Yeah,
they're super targeted, almost like smart bombs for the immune system.
you got it. Biologics are great because they zero in on very specific parts of the immune system that are going haywire in JIA. But because they're so powerful, there can be side effects, right? Like they might make a child more susceptible to infections. It's a balancing act for sure.
Definitely sounds like something doctors have to weigh carefully for each kid. But it wasn't all about medication in that research paper, was it? There was something in there about using artificial intelligence to help treat JIA. That sounds like something straight out of Star Trek.
I know, right? But it's getting real and fast. Scientists are using AI for some pretty amazing things. Picture this. An AI system that looks at a child's medical records, their genetics, even their x-rays, and it can help doctors predict how their JIA might progress.
So like a fortune teller for JIA, but powered by algorithms instead of a crystal ball.
Exactly. Having that kind of predictive power would be huge for making decisions about treatment, right? But it goes even further than that. AI could also be used to create truly personalized treatment plans.
What would that look like? Can you give me an example?
Sure. You know how some kids with JIA respond really well to one medication, while another kid might not see any improvement at all? AI could potentially help doctors figure out which treatment is most likely to work for which kid right from the start. It would save everyone a lot of trial and error, and potentially prevent a child from having to go through a treatment that might not even work for them.
Wow, that would be incredible. But this is still in the early stages, right? We're not shipping robots to replace pediatric rheumatologists quite yet.
Not quite. But the field is moving so quickly. There are AI tools being used in research right now, and some of them are even making their way into actual doctors'
So
offices.
AI, definitely something to watch.
Yeah.
But then there's the really futuristic stuff, like gene therapy. The paper mentioned it as a potential game changer. What's the deal with that?
Yeah, gene therapy is still pretty experimental, especially for GIA. But the basic concept, it's pretty mind-blowing. Imagine being able to actually correct the genes that might be contributing to a child's JIA. You could potentially prevent the disease from ever developing.
Whoa, okay, that's next level stuff, like hitting the reset button on JIA completely.
It does sound like sci-fi, I admit, but there are actually clinical trials going on right now for gene therapy for other autoimmune diseases, so it's not as out there as it seems. And for JIA specifically, there's a lot of buzz about CRISPR technology.
CRISPR. I've heard that name before. Can you remind me what that is?
Think of CRISPR as this incredibly precise gene editing tool. It lets scientists go in and make really specific changes to DNA, almost like fixing a typo in the genetic code.
So if a child has a gene that's increasing their risk of JIA, CRISPR could potentially go in and fix that.
That's the hope. Now, it's still early days, we're not quite there yet, and there are some hurdles to overcome before this becomes a reality. But the potential for gene editing to revolutionize how we treat JIA, and a ton of other diseases for that matter, it's huge.
My head's spinning a little bit with all this cutting-edge science. We've gone from chameleons to AI to gene editing in one episode. What's the one big takeaway you want our listeners to remember about JIA?
You know, even though it's a complex disease, one that often throws curveballs at patients, families, even us doctors, there's a lot to be hopeful for. Research is moving forward at lightning speed, and we're seeing really exciting treatments, therapies, even technologies that weren't even imaginable a few years ago. The future is looking brighter all the time for kids with JIA.
Absolutely. It's a whole new world of possibilities. And on that note, to all our listeners out there, if you or someone you know is dealing with JIA, don't hesitate to reach out to a healthcare professional, a pediatric rheumatologist if you can. Get the latest information, get the support you need, and know that there is hope. And to everyone listening, thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of juvenile idiopathic arthritis. We'll catch you next time, same channel, for another fascinating deep dive into the world of research and discovery. Until then, keep those brains engaged, keep asking questions, and keep exploring.